One thing that I did not accentuate maybe as much last week as I should have was that when Samuel anoints Saul as king, did God want them to have a king or not?
No.
He was the king.
He was the king,
Yeah.
and he says, I don't want them to have a king, but I will even work through kingship with them. That's an important point to make, because a lot of times we might think, well, there are people we know who belong to churches that may not have it all together. And they may teach some kind of strange stuff, and we might say, we don't believe that. We don't think that that's right. And yet, you look here, and again, I'm making an observation and a supposition at this point. You look here, and it may be that what God is saying is, even with those who do not act according to everything as I've set it in motion. Of course, we might not be either, because we all think we're doing what's right. But even through them, I will still bless and let my work be done. All right, so we shouldn't say we have to be perfect or else God will not work through us. All right, there are things we may not know that we have misinterpreted, that we think we're right on target with it. And so rather than the idea of perfection here, God says, okay, they're rejecting me, they're not rejecting you, Samuel, but in spite of that, I'll work with them anyway. Now, it doesn't turn out real well in the end. Okay, that's for the 15th or 16th of May for us to see when everything finally falls apart in Jerusalem. But even at this point, even with David, it's really not what God had originally intended. He intended to simply take care of matters himself. I will be with you, I will bless you. But now we have this whole long thing all the way from 1 Samuel all the way through 2 Kings that's going to talk about how does God work through prophets and with kings or against kings, as the case may be. And so he's not going to abandon them any more than Samuel says, I'm going to quit praying for you because you did something dumb. And that ought to remind us as well that just because we are frustrated with the way someone has done something doesn't mean we can say, good, now we're done with you. And so in chapter 16 through 31, what's the matter?
We looked at each other until you said that.
I concur.
I don't know why.
We would like to think so, right? I mean, keep hope alive.
Well, part of it is not just keep hope alive, but ask God himself to bring a blessing through people even when we can't be a blessing for them anymore. In other words, I might not be able to work with someone anymore. Someone might say, I don't want to have anything to do with you. That doesn't mean that I say, good riddance to you then.
Right.
But I can still say, Lord, bless those people who will have a chance to interact with such people who may not like what I had to say. I don't want you to run them out of the kingdom.
Yeah.
I don't want them to be lost for that. So anyway, 1 Samuel 16, the Lord says now to Samuel, go and anoint, well, a son of Jesse. We don't know which one that is going to be yet. And so as we get into that, Samuel himself is very afraid, isn't he? He's afraid that if Saul finds out what he is up to, that Saul will kill him. So I don't know my Roman history very well, but I do know of Roman emperors who killed their teachers because the teachers still thought I could still tell him something, and at some point the teachers go the way of everybody else. And that has happened throughout time. You have to be careful of what you say and when you say it. There's this story, you know the story about a whipping boy? I wasn't thinking to tell you this one, but it's a kind of a neat story. There's a story about a whipping boy, and I think it is about a king named King James, but I'm not sure about that. Not the one with the Bible, I don't think. But anyway, there was this guy who was a prince, and the teacher was having just a terrible, difficult time with him. No matter what he tried to do, the kid just wouldn't sit still and listen. Now, if you're a teacher and you know that's going to be the king someday, you want to be a little bit circumspect about spanking him, etc. And so the teacher got a whipping boy, brought a whipping boy in. So every time the prince was bad, he whipped the other kid. He's hoping that the prince will feel sorry for the other kid and quit doing it. Okay, didn't apparently work. Okay, but that's what God does in Christ. Jesus becomes the whipping boy. What we do against him, he takes his own son and pours on him the iniquity of us all and says, that worked. So I'll give you his holiness, his righteousness, his peace with me. And that's what the story of the gospel is. That's why it's kind of a nice story. It's not the story about the whipping boy, but I mean it's a deeper level of that. So anyway, David does not come to the game. He is so young, he is still with the sheep. Now, it's going to talk about him as being red and ruddy in complexion. I think what that means is you can still see his cheeks because he doesn't have a beard yet. Right? He's that young. Okay? He's just barely of the age to be a grown-up. And in the settings that I've been in Israel, I have seen a lot of cases where you've got kids who are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. Maybe there's 20, 25 sheep and goats, and maybe there's a couple, 3 kids. Okay, and so if there's no wolf or bear or lion around, they're not really worried about that there's going to be an attack. So if there's an animal, that is attacking, then certainly things are going to change very quickly. But normally the kids can watch over the animals and make sure they get some pasture grazing and some water and things like that. And so David is so young, he's not even with the other ones. Samuel, who's still thinking like he did with Saul, who was a head and shoulders taller than everyone else, he sees the oldest 3 boys and the other ones, and he says, I thought this would be a good choice, but God says no. God looks into the heart. Now, the Spirit of God has not come in a special way on David yet, but it says that God looks at the heart, and so when David is brought in, and they trade for somebody else in the family, so he can't be that far away. It's not like he's 40 miles away. I mean, he's going to be in the vicinity somewhere. Then when he is brought in, Samuel says, this is the one, and privately, in the presence of his family, not probably in the presence of all the elders and all the people of the town, he anoints David to become king, and that's kind of the end of that. The word here is used for Elam, or for him as an Elam. The word Alma, the feminine for that, you might know the name Alma, is the word that is used when it says in Isaiah, an Alma will conceive and bear a son. So a girl who is now a virgin, just at the time of starting to have children, 12, 13, 14 years old, will have a son. We'll talk about that more when we get there, but the Elam is used only here, and it'll be used of when Saul says, who's that Elam over there? Who's that young kid with pink cheeks? He's been out in the sun, but he's not even a grown-up yet, hardly. And we get varied feelings about David, don't we? Is he a grown-up soldier, or is he a young kid? What in the world is he anyway? Yes?
Is, when he's been anointed, is he king to be, or is he king right now?
He's king to be. And so he would be called a Nagid, is the technical word for it. Some people would say he never really is king, that when God says he's the Nagid, he's always the prince and God keeps the kingship role. All right? And if we want to jump all the way ahead in the story, I think what happens in the New Testament is God says in Christ, I think I'll take the kingship back. And so Jesus becomes the Messiah who never needs to be replaced by anybody else. He's not even going to have any kids. And so God, once again, we live in the church under a theocracy, which is where people of my Christian persuasion would say we don't need a pope.
Yeah.
okay? Because we've already got Christ doing it, and so we don't need that role, okay? I think that's really, I mean, kingship didn't work real well. God says, I was doing a good job. You were the ones who didn't think I was.
Right.
And I think with Christ as true God and true man, I think he says, nah, I'll take that back now. You see, the other one didn't work.
Yeah.
But you'll have prophets who will say, we want to return to the time of the judges, the time before kings ever came. Prophets like Hosea do not believe there was anything good about kingship, because the kings all wanted people to serve them. Now, you take care of me, rather than I will serve you. And when Jesus talks about the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many, which is in Mark 10, that he is really saying, I didn't come here to be like your typical king. I came here to do something for you, rather than have you do something for me. Right? But and so the jumps sometimes go pretty far. Samuel says, God didn't really want us to have kings. He says, okay, I'll work through that anyway, but he doesn't work through that forever. Just like he will not tolerate wickedness on this earth forever. There's a time when it's going to be done. The Spirit of the Lord comes on David then, and if you don't have God's Spirit on you, then you've got nothing but an evil spirit. Whether you want to talk about it as some sort of a demon that is possessing Saul, or just an emptiness in himself that continues to make him realize God's not with him anymore. Little bit of a difference. The commentators point out that David has more of a permanent presence of the Spirit, whereas the Spirit came and went on Saul. I have to think about that a little bit. But for us as Christians, we would say that every single one of us who have been brought into that new relationship in Christ by holy baptism have the power of the Father, Son, and Spirit in us by baptism, and that the Spirit is a constant. Paul will say in Romans 8, the same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is at work in you. So don't be telling God what you can't do and that you're only a poor, sinful human being. Okay, we enjoy being sinners. It's a cop-out. No, well, I'm only human. Don't expect too much out of me. Lord says, wait a minute. The Spirit is in you once again. And so because of that, then there is going to be a different way in which God is going to work through him. So in some ways, the king will be kind of like the prophet was. Okay, like the judge was, where the Spirit of God would move them. So when Samuel rises up to kill Agag, which is just a little bit before what we've got here, he's acting in the role of a judge. And the king can act in the role of a judge. So, in other words, God says it may be more of a permanent institution, maybe even a dynasty one, but I can still work through them like I work through other people. So sometimes God does work through people. Samuel is going to be a nice example of that. The strange thing, and I know if you've read the text, you're going to say, how come David was playing the lyre for Saul, and yet the next chapter, when he sees him go against Goliath, he says, who is that kid? Was he behind the curtain? You know, and we can stand on our head and figure all sorts of things out. What a lot of people say is there were a lot of stories that were passed down, and as somebody draws them all together, they didn't necessarily weave them all. Okay, I don't know how to make better sense of it than that. Okay, so it would be as if Dale and I wrote down our remembrances of our cottage on Lake Erie. Some of those would be overlapping, where we would finish telling one story and the other one would start at a different place. And so that probably happens as well as the stories are gathered together. My stories would be correct, though, that's the only thing.
We hope so.
So anyway, but the point is, of all things, it's not really the lyre, it's not really the music that is calming Saul, but the presence of God in David. See, the fact that God is present and settling there, that kind of spills over beyond it. So it's not just the music. Okay? There's more going on. Well, anyway, chapter 17. I gave you, Maria actually typed typed it out or copied it for me. You have the listing of all of the chapters of the David story.
Yeah.
You have that sheet with all of those. You were looking at what was the test for my OT students. The David test was chapter number by chapter number, tell me the story of David out of your head. So from 1 Samuel 16 all the way through 1 Kings chapter 2. What I did for them was I listed who are the characters in each one, and then I broke it down into smaller sections to say, don't just try to memorize it cold, but look at what are the scenes. And so we're in a scene right now. This is when David is still interacting with Saul. The rest of what we'll look at today is when he is fleeing for his life from Saul, with Saul's death at the very end of that. That's not every name that appears in each chapter or place name, but that's in general, the stuff that's going on and the people who are involved in the story. And that's one way to say, okay, what's important? Who shows up and who doesn't, and how significant are they within the story? When I first started teaching, I gave a lot of matching tests where I would give 10 names and then I'd have something about each one of them. And I found out that even my A students couldn't tell me the story. And that's really becoming a lost art, telling stories. One of the things I would do at the very beginning of class is I would say, I'd like you each to write me a page about yourselves. And some did a nice job. A lot of them gave me 4 lines. They didn't know how to tell a story about themselves, who they were, and things like that. And did I ever do anything with you about the story of Little Red Riding Hood?
No.
No?
Well, tell me the story about Little Red Riding Hood. Watch out, by the way.
Watch out. Oh.
What's the story about Little Red Riding Hood?
She's going to see her big bad wolf.
She's going to see her grandma.
Grandma.
Well, that's starting in the middle of the story.
Oh.
And that's what everybody does. Everybody starts in the middle of the story. Connie?
Grandmother was ill,
All right?
and that's when the mother, it depends on which book you read.
I know.
And,
It was actually a rape story back in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
So, but
I mean, there's some,
it was a rape story. Yeah, it's been spruced up, you know, and many times. But anyway, now set the stage, Connie.
okay, grandmother was ill, and so her mother suggested that Little Riding Hood would follow the exact path to grandmother's house. She would make a basket of goodies to take to her.
And what was the path?
It had to go through the woods.
Okay, that's one version. The other version is you have to take the long way around outside the woods so that you're not in the middle of where somebody can jump out and hop on you. Okay?
Most books show that
Now,
she was
if it's
easily
going
distracted.
if she's going through the woods, what is the basic thing that Mommy says?
Don't be distracted by all of the, ways to get off the path, because in the woods there might be the big bad wolf.
Yeah. So don't talk to strangers. That's another version of it. Okay? So if you're going through the woods, don't talk to strangers. Another version says don't even go through the woods, go around them. But the important point of the story is, does she do what Mommy says?
No.
No.
Okay? That's the point of the story. Listen to your mother. Because your mother knows dangers that you don't know. And nothing bad will happen to me. So what happens to Grandma in the end? One version says he schlucked her down. The other, he locked her in a closet.
Some say he swallowed her.
Schlucked her down, that's what swallowed means. It's a good
I was
German
thinking of
word.
licking her down or something.
Good German word.
Einsperr.
Huh?
Einsperr.
Well, that was the second one, just to lock her in a closet. But, huh?
Sehr gut.
Maybe. In any case, somebody has to come and deliver her. Well, what's the story about Jesus?
Yes, come deliver us.
You know, well, what happens? His father says, I want you to take on human flesh, and I'm going to put you to death using my wrath against every other human being, and then you will give them life that they cannot have on their own, that they don't have on their own. See, if you don't start far enough back,
Yeah.
then Jesus just becomes the nice guy teaching people how to be good to each other. All right, and so, but the storytelling kind of thing says, all right, what's the bigger picture in which this is going to fit? And so we've always got to ask, okay, what's the overall narrative? It's why it's really dangerous to just pick out any text all by itself. But anyway, what used to be fun with the storytelling thing, and I would always start my Old Testament class with Little Red Riding Hood. I would always start with that.
You were mean.
Huh?
You were mean.
No. I am trying to explain why do we need to know the whole story. Okay? So by the time my students were done with Old Testament, the historical narrative, they could tell you the story of the Old Testament if they had learned their stuff. They could go all the way through and they could tell the connected narrative, which was the point. Then you can go deeper and look into what's going on here or there, but if you don't have that overall narrative, then how are you going to know that if you're looking at David and Goliath, that God really didn't really want to have kings? You know, this is part of the story. Part of, okay, he's going to be someone who's going to act kind of like a judge and rise up to defeat an enemy. But the fun part of it as well, it was really kind of sad, but I would say to the students, now look, you've got 44 chapters, I think it's 44 chapters there. If you do more than about a sentence or two on each one, you're not going to be able to finish the test. So I said, if you give me a whole page on the Goliath story, I know you're going to flunk the test. Because you're going to try and impress me, you at least know something about something. Most of the students who gave me a whole page on the Goliath story went 2 chapters after that, and that was it, and turned it in. Because that's what they learned at Sunday school. And so they didn't do anything in the class. It's what they learned in Sunday school. That's what they wrote down, and that's the story you learned in Sunday school. David and Goliath. Well, anyway, it was kind of sad, but it proved true all the time. And others, they would just go all the way through to 1 Kings 1 and 2 and have something on every single one of them. And I would also tell them, don't try to write down every one of those names. Don't try to put all of them in the story, but just to realize, okay, who are the major figures all the way through. So anyway, I did not bring it down. I was going to bring it down and I didn't. But I actually have the actual stone that was used by David against Goliath. It is upstairs. Maybe during the break I can try to remember to bring it down. It's got a red smudge on it from his blood. Now, I'm serious. I've got a rock, a round rock with a red smudge on it. It is probably a sling stone. Okay? How big do you think?
Little.
Tiny.
Probably about
About a golf ball, huh?
Baseball.
Baseball.
Yeah. When you see the archaeological pictures of sling stones, they're about, well, not quite as big as my fist, but pretty close. We're not talking a little bit of oof. We're all yeah. Something's going to clunk the guy. One of the great things about the story, one of the great things about it, is after David clunks Goliath in the head, he then pulls his sword out of the sheath to chop off his head. What does that mean?
make sure he was dead.
No, it means Goliath was so toying with him, he hadn't even pulled his sword out yet. He wasn't coming to attack him. He's toying with this little kid. He didn't even pull his sword out yet. David clunked him. He wasn't ready for battle. Okay, so, yeah, but he doesn't pull his sword out until after, you know. Goliath, come on, you little wimpy kid, what are you doing? You know, and oddly enough, there's evidence that maybe there was practice of circumcision also among the Philistines, okay, and some other peoples. But as David talks about it, he says, this uncircumcised Philistine. In other words, this unbeliever is going to talk about our God that way. Who does he think he is, acting as if he's stronger than our God? How many people on Saul's side were talking that way? Like David did. Hmm? One. David. Everybody else is wimping out. They're like the spies who say, those tall people, those thick-walled cities, we can't go to defeat them. They are not thinking God is with us. That's the theme of the Bible. What does it mean if God is with us? It doesn't mean you go do dumb stuff. God is with me doesn't mean I go stop a train, because he didn't plan for me to do that. But it means that when God makes his promises, that we don't say, well, I'll sit back and watch, but I'll pray that God will somehow help me to be involved in this and give me strength to start over again, even if I don't know how to. So here's David, this young kid who has the Spirit of God in him. He sees things from God's side of the story, not from the world's side. Reading through last night and yesterday in our Lenten series, I read through the Gospel of Mark this year in 5 sections. And so the one yesterday, why does Pilate put Jesus on the cross? Because he feared the crowds, the leaders. Who do you fear? Or whom do you fear? Okay, you decide whom you fear, and everything else has to fall into place. So if I'm more afraid of the world than I am of God, then I'll keep my mouth shut and do nothing and say nothing. If I say, well, in the heart of God is that he wants all to be saved, then that's different. Then I'm going to say, how do I get to live that out, even if nobody else follows? Okay? Not that I say, well, that's not going to work or doesn't work. People say today, well, the church is dying. Is it really? There may be certain things that Christians have done that aren't working anymore, but the church shall never perish. Her dear Lord, to defend and guide and sustain and cherish, is with her to the end. And so it says, now which voice do you listen to? Why do we worship? So we can hear God's voice. Because out there we hear every other voice. And there's a whole lot more of them than there is of him. Which is why to hear the gospel means I get wrapped in the I am with you week after week. That's another way of saying I love you. I told Kathy I love her. She said, shut up, I'm tired of hearing that. No, she didn't. She said, I love you too. And if worship is God saying I love you, then I want to come and hear that. If worship is I'm unhappy with you again this week, well, no wonder some people quit going to church. If all it is finding out this is what's wrong with you this week, go try and be better. No, it's in spite of what you have done against me, this is who you are, and this is whose you are, and I'm with you. And so David, the Lord is with me, and so he goes and he clunks Goliath. It always reminds me when I see this story about usually 6th graders in football uniforms. You ever seen little skinny 6th and 7th graders with the big pads on? You can hardly see their head poking up out of there. So what does Saul do? He says, well, if he's going into battle, then he needs to be with weaponry. He needs to be with protective gear. So he puts it all on, and David can't even move. I've been reading through some of the books that I have at home on stories from way back when. And Mark Twain writes about a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. And the Connecticut Yankee, they dress him all up in the uniform and all the metal and everything. He can't hardly go in at all, like 150 pounds or something that he's wearing. And so David says, I can't walk in all this stuff. But I am wearing the armor of the living God. Now that doesn't mean we go and do that at all times and just say, I'm going to wander in and God will keep me from getting hurt. I read something the other day, I don't remember where there was a guy who was in the Merchant Marines or with the Coast Guard or something like that. And the person who was supervising him as a student said, you sure didn't seem to be making very good decisions. about the safety as you're going through this very dangerous area. He said, well, I'm a believer and I believe God will get me through. Had fired that moment. Okay? God doesn't say, now just take risks and let me try and get you through. He says, you make sure you're as smart as you can. How many stones did David pick up? He might have missed the first time. He didn't pick up just one, he picked up 5. Okay, so he's got 4 more there. What if he got a couple of balls first, low and outside? You know, instead of a high hard one. Well, he happened to get a high hard one the first time. Kids who are out as shepherds have nothing else to do except to throw rocks and to have games out there. I mean, there's nothing else to do. The sheep are, you know, sitting there half the time doing nothing. So what do? Yes, Connie?
Write music or play instruments.
Or wing stones. Wing rocks. I was able one time in my life to be in the engine of a steam locomotive. One Sunday afternoon, a friend of mine in Heidelberg took me to Heilbronn in the cab. And they knew I was doing it. They knew I wasn't supposed to be. Everybody knew I was doing it. But one of the things that Wolfgang said is the railroad engineers, I mean, if your train is going and the signals are all working and there's always somebody cranking them down, one of the things you do is you take lumps of coal and you try and hit the signs with it as you're going along the track. Another version of the same kind of thing. Okay? And so David, in addition, and I guess a bear doesn't have a beard, a lion does, but he says, you know, if there was a lion or a bear that came by the sheep, I'd just grab him by the chinny chin chin and whack him a good one. He's, you know, he's kind of a macho kid he's talking here. It's kind of fun to read this. You know, it's one of the most human kind of things. Well, anyway, we do that nowadays. What David did with Goliath, we call them teams. So Chicago plays the Twin Cities. Okay? The Cubs come in here and play the Twins, and then we find out for that weekend which is the better city, right? Or the Vikings are going to play the Cardinals, and we're going to find out who is the best team this week. And what do they usually do? They're usually carting somebody off who's gotten hurt, and we say, oh, isn't that too bad? Not realizing the 9 or 10 months of rehab they're going to have after they go down through the tunnel. But we all collectively just watch. That's what's going on here. Everybody else is just watching. And Goliath says, okay, I'm the best on my side, bring out your best, and whoever wins, then they win the whole thing. Well, then the Israelites, after they have seen this victory, then they go and they follow on. And they go and defeat the Philistines, who for a while then will not be bothering them anymore. Okay, because the Philistines are down in here. They're always moving, trying to move up. They will eventually be up here at the end of this book. So they're going to be up at the top, or over here if you want to use this one. So they're going to be trying to take the land from here. They want to go and get farmland as much as they can. That's really what this is about. Okay, this is about wanting more territory. They didn't just fight just because they had nothing better to do on a Saturday afternoon. Okay, they're trying to get more land for themselves. So, next chapter. Unless there's questions about that one.
I do. Okay, I'm going to just step back just a little bit.
Okay.
You said it wasn't in God's plan. Does God plan everything for us? Do you believe? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, let's see. Jim Kinzel always talks about that I don't get halfway through by the beginning of the first hour. That just kind of sealed the fate for us here. Does God have everything planned? Well, what's the passage people usually use for this?
Or I know
I have
the
plans
plans
for
I
you.
have.
I know the plans I have for you, plans for peace and not
Yeah.
for evil, to give you a future and a hope, which is in Jeremiah 29.
Yep.
Okay? Now, he says, I have plans to give you a future and a hope. Does God have a plan for me tonight about how I am going to drive home?
I think he does. I think he's got a plan for us. It's how we abuse it, I guess.
So, I have to know whether or not it's proper that I go down Lexington and go down to Como and go by the park and then get on to Snelling, or whether I turn right and go over to Larpenteur and go down to Snelling, or if I go Lexington all the way down to Minnehaha and go home, and I have to decide and try to figure out from God what his plan is for me for that.
No, I don't, no, I don't think.
But you see, if we talk about God has a plan for me,
Okay.
the usual thing is I have to figure out what God's plan is so I can carry it out. So God has a plan for me right now. Okay, I started this course back in September, and I'm teaching this right now. Was that God's real plan for me?
Maybe, I think it was, because you got the talent and.
But
Good.
maybe I should be out in the neighborhood knocking on doors.
Well, then it makes you a Jehovah's
She's
Witness.
saying.
Jehovah's Witnesses are not the only ones who knock on doors. Okay? Or maybe I am supposed to be spending an hour with each of my shut-ins every week.
Oh, no, I think that you.
Or maybe I should be upstairs now reading my commentary on the Gospel of Mark, because I'm going to be preaching on that this year and I need to know more about Mark, and that I'm being willful and selfish to do something that's not just for the congregation that called me, but for somebody else. How am I going to know?
But haven't you made a commitment though to this? I mean,
How did I decide to make the commitment?
Oh,
well.
Was it
I
by
don't know.
God's will that he said I should do this? Or was it me saying I'll do this so I don't have to do something else?
I think it was the Holy Spirit through,
How do you know? You think, okay?
well, yeah,
All right.
supposition, yeah.
You're making a supposition.
Yeah.
Maybe I would be better off to be working at the car wash over by Target and helping to dry cars and being able to share the gospel with the people who are getting their cars washed.
but maybe they don't want that word, maybe, we come to hear it.
Would
But-
you like us to
but-
go?
But if he wants all people to be saved,
Right.
then why am I spending my time with you instead of looking for the people who don't know that yet?
Because what we're learning from you, we share it with other people, at least I do.
Okay,
You know?
all right.
So I think that we pass it on.
Okay, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but how do I know about any particular thing that I've done? If I get a divine call this afternoon, okay, if I go upstairs and at 3:30, some congregation calls me from St. Louis and says, we've issued you a divine call. How do I know which one is from God and which one isn't? If God has a plan for me, then I have to be spending all my time trying to figure out what is the plan. So should I have been reading the commentary by P. Kyle McCarter on 1 Samuel, or should I have been reading Ralph Klein's commentary on 1 Samuel, or should I have been reading Ray Brown's commentary on the last on Jesus' death, or should I be reading the one by Gulick on Mark 1-8? And how do I know when I finish one, what God wants me to do next? What's pleasing to him? You see, if I start trying to micromanage this,
Okay.
I'll go nuts.
Yeah, well, I'm going nuts.
Yeah, and that was exactly the point.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. Does God have plans for us to live out our Christian life? Yes. Does he say there are a variety of different ways we can do it? Yes. And so instead of being crushed by having to figure out what's the correct thing, it's sort of like, which stock should I buy? Okay? Now, I don't know how many stocks are out there, but there's got to be thousands of them. And if I go to, which financial planner should I go to? How should I manage the money that I have? Should I give money to Central Lutheran School? Should I give money to Emmaus? Should I give money to Concordia Ann Arbor, to Concordia St. Paul, to Concordia St. Louis? And, you know, at a certain point, if we're burdened with, what does God want me to do? We can go crazy. And so what I want to do is I want to say I have a general trajectory to look at the gifts God has given me, to ask Him for His guidance. So I did a lot of thinking and reading and praying in the winter time about what should I do for Lent this year. Okay, and I finally came up with, well, I've never done it before, but I'm going to read the Gospel of Mark over 5 weeks. All right? I asked the Lord for help. Could I have done a different series? Sure, I could have done a whole bunch of different things. So it's not like this one is perfect and everyone else isn't, or every other one isn't. But that within a range, we say, God, give us guidance to use our brains the best we can, and our gifts and our abilities to do what we can. I'm thrilled to do this. I'm not trying to get out of it. But I realize that there are people who could say, well, you're not really doing what you should be doing, because they'll have some other idea of what I should be doing. And I could say to people as well, you're not doing what you're supposed to be. Not everybody is living out their Christian life and able to describe it. There are people who are saying, here's how I'm fed and strengthened. So we have opportunities. How many people could be down in this room? What, 230, I think, is the number? Okay, we don't have 230 down here. How about some other people? Well, they said, well, that's not in my plan. Okay, so I could say, well, if there aren't 230 down here, then I'm not going to do it anymore. Or I could say, I'm thankful for the people who come. And so there's one thing. God says, I have plans for you for a future and a hope. But if that becomes a puzzle where I have to figure out how each piece fits and be worried every morning when I get up, what does God want me to do today? And how am I going to figure that out? I'll never know how I'm hearing it, whether it's from Him or not. In my own mind, if something that I think is a good thing rattles around in my brain long enough, and in my heart, I said, I think I'll do that. Might be a lot of time, a lot of expense. But, so if somebody asks me to support some sort of a mission or whatever, so I'll say, okay, Lord, give me some kind of guidance. Let something kind of settle for where when this kind of idea comes to my mind, I say, well, that sounds like a good one. And rather than saying, well, I'm going to be sure all the time, that's what Luther means when he says sin boldly. He said, you come up with the best you think, and you go on with it, and He will bless you. And if at some point you say, well, that was a foolish idea, then you'll figure that out and backtrack and go a different way. But there are many people who think that God is the great quilt maker, and that every single thing that happens, every toenail that gets cut, every turn that we make in the car is God's plan for us. In philosophy, they call that determinism. And soft and hard determinism. Soft says, I make my mind up, but God really wanted me to make my mind up that way. Hard determinism says, what we do, we really don't have any control over. We just think we do. And the opposite of that in philosophy is free will, which says, I make all my decisions, and I take the consequences of them. Somewhere within there, I think God has given us gifts to use. But I am very, very suspicious that I will make the wrong interpretation on something, and I might think God's telling me one thing, and I might latch on it. Well, God's trying to tell me this, and then go do something really stupid. Now, did God move David to go kill Goliath? Yeah. You go kill Goliath. Because when that's there, he simply says, but there are other things that aren't quite so clear, and it's nice and clear in the past, it's not so clear in the future. And so when we look at how do we deal with our health, how do we deal with our relatives, and caring for them, it's not like it's all easy, and what's the right answer? There is no right answer for many of the things. And so if God has a plan for everything, then I'm simply a robot trying to read the instructions, instead of a human being who is given the ability in human matters to be able to act consistently with what I am as a Christian, and to ask the Lord to help me do that. And to go from there. So I hope I spoiled that a little bit, but didn't spoil the whole thing, okay? Because I would really be in trouble if I have to figure out what way God wants me to go home. Because then, the night that I get in an accident, I'll say, see, God wanted me to go on Minnehaha instead of on Snelling, and that's why I got in the accident. Okay, a couple quick,
I'm just gonna say, if we allow God to be with us, then He is helping us, directing us in what we do.
oh, I don't like that word allow.
Well, not allow.
If we recognize that God is with us,
Yes.
we ask Him to help us make good,
Right.
honorable decisions.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So I don't want to ever be in the position of
No,
that
I'm
I
sorry.
control the way God does it, but if, I would rather say, if I recognize that God does use me on this earth to bring His love and forgiveness to others, then go live your life. And don't be crushed by, oh, I'm doing what's right or wrong. So if I recognize He does that, then go live and follow the things that you think are sensible.
That's what God wants us to do, is go and live our lives.
I don't think wants is correct. He
Well,
equips us to. He equips us to.
maybe I should just be quiet.
No, I wanna keep going at this, Bruce,
Yeah.
because it's already inside.
Yes,
It's already inside. Wants
It's
is
innate,
always,
yes.
I want somebody to get me some more coffee. Okay? Until right now, nobody knew that. Okay? But it's something somebody else would have to do for me so that I can have a little more coffee on my throat. Okay? Now, that's one person to another. Okay? But the other thing would be what is inside of us already. So what God wants me to do and all of that is very different from what God equips me to do, what He moves me to do. In other words, I can assume He's moving me to do things even though I don't feel a tingle at a certain moment. Say, oh, God just told me to do this, I better go do this right
the
now.
tap on the shoulder, yeah.
I hope I don't get the tap on the shoulder. Thank you very much.
Not today.
I don't want the tap on the shoulder. So, yes, sir?
But He gives us all sorts of resources of other people, other Christians, books, so-called experts, so you could go to this source and that source, and so if you wonder something, check with a bunch of stuff and then pray and then conclude and do it the best you can.
The main thing is don't hold back so long
Yeah,
that you do nothing.
yeah, right.
And don't use the excuse, I don't know what's right, so I'm not gonna do it, or I might mess up.
Yeah,
Because I might mess up is saying God's not with me,
Yeah.
and so I'll automatically do the wrong thing instead of God is with me. And so He will help me as I've done that preparation and that reading and that learning. He will help me to do what's consistent with His will.
Well, if it doesn't quite work, you'll find a way.
You keep on going from there, yes? Connie?
I once read a devotion or something that said, perhaps when we go to heaven, the Lord will have made like a tapestry of our life where we can see where we made all these decisions and how He kind of wove it all together for something good for us. In Romans He promises, even out of bad situations, for the believers, He will help to something good will happen.
I worry about that.
I don't know,
I know that is a very common thing that people will say, but then it sort of sounds like God gets me into the car wreck so that something good can come from it. And I get real nervous about those kinds of things because then that puts God in charge of everything. And He has said, get out of the garden. I'll be with you outside the garden, but He doesn't lock us down into being automatons. And so I worry about that. That
Also,
it's still just a nicer version of God was letting bad things happen to me, and someday I'll see why that was good. The pastor that I was was my bishop on vicarage, his son took his life. And at this funeral home, some people said to him, God works for good. In all things God works for good to those who love Him. And he said that was probably the hardest thing anyone ever said to him. Now, can anything good come from those things? Well, we might say, well, we made it through that one and we at least lived on. But to say that God is directly sending
Right.
bad stuff would deny that it is finished on the cross.
I don't think that was the point of it either. The point was, it eventually, and I don't think when we get to heaven, we're gonna care less of what all happened.
That's my answer.
That's it.
But I do think he sees the whole picture and how even we can come out of the very pits of despair, because he has, he's there waiting for us, and maybe when we look back at our life,
I don't think he's there waiting for us, I think he's there with us.
With us, yeah.
yeah.
In other words, every time you're gonna say, well, he's over there and I'm here trying to get to him, I'm gonna make trouble.
Right.
Because David has the Lord inside him and is acting accordingly to that. And Saul often can't hear what God is saying because he says, should I do this or that? And God goes silent. I don't know that ever happens with David.
Did you ever think that Saul was going through some mental illness as well?
I think anything is, I think everybody would have mental illness if God is not there. If God is not there guiding and settling me, I think that's mental illness. Just not maybe the way we talk about it. Okay? There's something broken in our being if we're not at peace with God. And so that's going to come out in various ways. And even the people who say, well, I'm doing fine, they know that there are times when they're not. Anyway, so David and Jonathan become good buddies. Saul hears them saying, oh, Saul has slain his thousands, but David has slain his 10,000s. His Alaphaim and his Revavim. And oh my goodness, Saul all of a sudden gets jealous. He gets mightily jealous of David. I've told you I don't think the Bible really is about biblical heroes that we're supposed to be like. Samuel lives a good, honorable life. The closest that I would see to someone who really had a stake in the matter would be Jonathan. Jonathan should become king. All right? What should Jonathan do to David when he's talking to him? Stick him through. Okay? He is the opposition. If you find anybody in the Bible who says, it's okay, he wants to be number one, I'll be number two, when he was supposed to be number one. Very interesting kind of thing. We don't hear anything about the Spirit of God was on him or anything like that. But Jonathan is acting appropriately. I don't have to be the most important here. I see that God is working through David. I will acknowledge that God is working through him. I don't know if there's anybody else in the Bible like that. We'll get some other stories of very, very neat people who have faith and live that out. But instead of saying I'd like to be like that, just say, well, God has made me like that in some ways too. That he has given each of us the ability to be at peace with him. And that the upset that comes from why isn't everything all together doesn't matter if the core is all there. And so sometimes I think of the Christian faith as that eye in the middle of the storm, where all around there's all sorts of flying around, but right in the middle it's calm there, and that's our relationship with God. If we want to stop all the storms, then we have to get out of that center and go try to knock them all down on our own, which doesn't work. And it may be that what God does is he says, I'll let you try to stop all the troubles in your life to find out you can't. And then you'll recognize you've been looking in the wrong place. So some of that can come in there too. Well, anyway, Saul and David become very good friends. And this business about the evil spirit that comes upon him, it may be a being, it may be just that complete emptiness and anger of recognizing what he had, and now he's got a vacuum where God was, emptiness where God was. That's what Adam and Eve have. There's a big hole in the center of them where the Spirit of God was guiding and leading them. Now they're on their own. So you can have various words to talk about that, but Saul gets so irritated that a couple times he tries to kill David with his spear, and David has to escape that. And then Saul makes David a general. Why? So he can slay his 10,000s?
No, so you can order.
Send him to battle.
Hopes he'll get killed in battle. I mean, that's the big deal. If I can get him killed in battle, that's exactly what David does with Uriah the Hittite. Yep. So David understands that much. First of all, David was supposed to get Merab, the older daughter, because if you were the husband of the oldest daughter, then you would be higher in line for becoming the next king. Okay, not the second. You're married to the second daughter. If the first daughter's husband is more powerful, then you get that one. So Adriel gets Merab. David had been promised, if you kill Goliath, you get my daughter. And he kind of backpedals and says, I'm not very important. Probably didn't have the bride price. He didn't have the price to give to the king, and so he holds back. And then Saul hears that Michal loves David and says, well, we'll send him forth. You don't have a bride price, that's okay. Go get 100 Philistine foreskins. Okay, you don't go buy them in the store. You buy them by killing somebody. And the Hebrew text uses the dual form, which means he brought back 200. All right? Now, even the Yankees don't go 162-0. And David is going to expect that somebody's going to kill him. When he finds out that David is successful in bringing back the 200 Philistine foreskins, then he gets really spooked. Both of them operate out of fear. David out of fear, Saul's going to kill me, and Saul out of fear, David is going to take over. So they're both living that kind of scary kind of thing. Chapter 19, Jonathan says, you got to watch out for my dad. And at first, Jonathan asks, Dad, lay off it. He's been doing nothing but good stuff for you. And at first that happens, but then that evil spirit comes on him again. And then he tries to attack David once more. So Michal helps David escape. Some commentators suggest this was on their wedding night.
This was what?
On their wedding night.
Oh, on their wedding.
That Saul says, okay, bring him to me. I know where he is now. So bring him to me. Well, he's sick, bring his bed. Bring him in his bed. I don't care if he's sick. And going to kill him. And then we have teraphim are described various ways in terms of household gods and deities. This one sounds like it's almost life-size in the corner. And so she puts that on the bed and then puts some kind of scraggly sheep wool all around it. And says, oh, he's sick in bed. You'd kind of wonder, didn't it look white? Wouldn't that be kind of strange for a young man to have white hair? But anyway, David escapes. Maybe their house was like the house of Rahab, kind of in the wall of the city, so she could let him down and he would be outside. But then Saul goes to chase after David, and he sends several groups of others. And this ecstatic stuff where the spirit of frenzy falls on all of them, even Saul once again has the Spirit of God fall on him, and he's acting in a way that looks like it's out of his mind. He finally lays off. And so it says it wiped him out so much he laid there for about a day and didn't have strength to do anything. And then finally, chapter 20, David once again says, what is going on here? And he doesn't show up at a New Year festival. The first day doesn't matter. Second day, David says to Saul says to Jonathan, where is he anyway? Well, he had a family celebration that his brothers invited him to. That might mean Dad is dead by then. We don't know. But then Saul condemns Jonathan by talking about his mother. He says that no good of a woman. She wasn't gonna make a good kid anyway. You're whipping out on me, and you're no good. Your mother was no good. So, as filthy as he can talk, to try and put a distance now between himself and Jonathan. Jonathan's going to die with his dad at the very end, but Jonathan stomps off, and he says to David, you better get out of here. We're going to see a little bit more of that. So let's get out of here at the moment for our little break.
Wasn't Jonathan crippled?
No, his son Mephibosheth was crippled.
Okay.
Yeah. When
Jonathan's son?
Jonathan's son. When
Okay.
Saul died and Jonathan died, the nurse grabs hold of little Mephibosheth and runs and trips and breaks both his ankles as they're fleeing, because they're afraid the Philistines will come and wipe out the whole family. And so David brings Mephibosheth into his household. I've got a story about that for you, but it has to wait for the next time. It's a vacation Bible school story of all things. It's not a good one. Chapter 21. You will notice now that we have David on the run. So from chapters 21 to 31, David is going to be fleeing from Saul, who is going to try to be killing him because he sees him as a threat, and you get rid of your threats that way. And so David is going to be all over the place. Okay, he is going to be all over the place, all around in the southern part of the country, so down around in all of this here. Sorry I didn't bring my piece of tape with me today, but every time I move it, somebody blows hard at the thing.
That's Dick.
But anyway, around in here, particularly the southern end of the country, he's going to be back and forth all over the place. The first thing he does is he goes to Ahimelech at Nob. And there have been a couple questions. I'm going to try to be done early enough to take some questions at the end about the evil spirit and all that kind of stuff. I'm not forgetting that. But he first of all goes to the high priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech is the great-grandson of Eli. You remember Eli and his two sons Hophni and Phinehas? And Hophni and Phinehas died at the hand of the Philistines when the ark was taken.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Ahimelech, whose father is Ahitub, is serving at Nob, probably, and there's only kind of a hint at it in the Psalms about Shiloh being destroyed, that the entire city of Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant had been, that all of that was destroyed. And little comments that I make like this, archaeologists go and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars digging at all those sites. And they look for whether there's destruction layers in the pottery that fits with that particular place or not. I don't remember the story on this. I know that Shiloh was burned, whether it's right at this point they think or not. But he goes and he lies. Probably nobody with him. But he says, oh, my boys are hiding. And Saul sent me out on a trip, and I didn't even have time to get my weaponry. Can you give me some food to eat? And then he finds out Goliath's sword is there, which is kind of surprising because we were told elsewhere that David went and took it to his own house. Okay, so whether or not it got moved from there, you can speculate all you want. But he sees a fellow there named Doeg the Edomite. Where do you think Doeg the Edomite is from? Edom. Oh, surprise. From down around here. Now, why would you have someone like Doeg the Edomite serving you if you were Saul?
Turns out he's a bad guy.
He turns out to be a really bad guy. He causes the death of all the high priestly family. He's the Henry Kissinger. Why was Henry Kissinger a wonderful Secretary of State? He could never become president. He was a German, that's as high as he could rise. So he is no threat.
He and Arnold.
Huh?
He and Arnold.
He and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, yes, he can't be president either. He will not be back to be president.
Right. I'll be back.
Now, so Doeg the Edomite, if you have foreigners who surround you, then they're beholden to you for their job. They are not a threat to your job. Okay, and so Doeg doesn't really, I haven't found a good answer about why he was at Nob. Some people say, well, he was Doeg the Edomite, but he maybe was a worshiper of Yahweh, or maybe he was unclean and he had to spend some time there until he was purified, or whatever the case may be. Every single thing you might wonder about has about 100 different directions it can go. And that's really frustrating when you read the Bible. Well, I wonder what this means. I wonder why this is here. And then you go and look at all the answers that people give. And so you get some of the story, you don't get all of it. There's never a way to tell the whole story. And yes, sir?
Yeah, I was just saying, in my Bible it says that Doeg, Edomite, he was the chief of Saul's guardsmen.
Yes, or the chief of Saul's sheep is another one, another way it's translated, or the chief of the runners who would run before him. There are a variety of different suggestions about what the Hebrew word means for that. But you see, what wouldn't the others do? The others wouldn't kill the high priest,
But he does.
but he doesn't care, which tells me he wasn't a worshiper of Yahweh, at least not a real one. He said, I don't care. But you realize what happens when Saul kills the high priest? What he's saying about God and God's presence there? When he kills the high priest and doesn't believe him when he says, I'm innocent of these charges, I didn't know what was going on.
He kills all the families, too.
85 members of the family and everybody else in Nob, all except Abiathar, who is able to flee. And so, but at this point, in chapter 21, all we find out is that David went and he lied about his buddies being there. He got a little bit of food, and all they get is the holy bread. I have a note either in one of my commentaries or in my Bible that says, were these people that poor that they had no common bread there? I mean, you've got 12 loaves of bread that are replaced every Sabbath. And he asked for 5 of them. Are there no other people, or there's no other food there? I mean, is the high priest that poor at this point that they got nothing else? Was it just not made, or whatever the case may be? And again, don't have any answer to it. But here he takes Goliath's sword, and then he flees to Achish the first time. Achish of Gath is going to be down around right in there, not quite along the coast, inside a little bit. And the first time he goes there to Achish, Achish is still very suspicious of him. All right, and so Gath is one of the 5 Philistine cities. He says, if I leave the country, then Saul is not going to pursue me into Philistine territory. But when he gets there, and Achish says, I have enough dummies and yo-yos and weirdos here. What do I need another one for? And so what does David do? Acts insane. He foams at the mouth, rolls around on the ground, and beats a hasty path to the door. Later he's coming back. He'll be back to Achish later, when Achish at least says, oh my goodness, I've been hearing all about Saul trying to kill him. So must be that if Saul wants to kill him, a friend or an enemy of my enemy is my friend. Okay? And so let him come in here, and then he gets a whole town, and then does a lot of really sneaky stuff along the way. But anyway, at first David says, well, that didn't work. So then chapter 22, he goes back into the central area of the hills, and I've mentioned this a couple of times. It seems like the land had been flat until there was earthquake activity, and then it gets squeezed together, so you've got a lot of limestone caves and everything, particularly in the southern part and all the whole central spine of the country. So there are a lot of caves where the water will wash out the limestone, and so there's a lot of hiding places that he can find. At first he has 400 and then 200 more. Some people say they were just people who were being maltreated. Others, they were the minority. They were the ones who didn't like Saul anyway. So he gets a kind of a wild bandit crowd with him. And they're not going to always be polite and nice. Then he sends his parents to Moab. I don't know how many TV shows have had the plot that they smoke some guy out who's in hiding because they kidnap his girlfriend or his daughter. Who's the Bruce Willis? There's one where they take his daughter into custody, you know, and so anything you can do to smoke them out. And so what does David do? He sends his mom and dad over to Moab. Why? Because Ruth, the Moabitess, was his great-grandma. So sending them over here, Saul isn't going to be able to go over there to get them, and so he's protecting himself. And so that must mean that at least at this point, I mentioned before that maybe Jesse wasn't alive, but he has to be alive if he's sent over here. And so he has them out of the way. He has his wives with him, or will have his wives with him. So he's trying to protect himself that those near and dear to him are not objects of kidnapping or adult napping, so that they can draw David out. Then there is a prophet who only appears a couple times in the whole story, Gad. And he appears, Gad and Nathan are the two prophets who are going to speak to David after after Samuel. And he says, go away from the stronghold, just go down into the area of Judah. So there's a lot of places to hide here. One of the things you do have to pay attention to is wherever you're going to look for people, you need to look for some fresh water. So anyone who knows where the fresh water is, that kind of narrows it down a bit. Okay, they didn't have these plastic bottles of water that you could put everywhere. So in Gedi, where David is going to go in chapter 24, and other places. So you can kind of narrow it down that way to where they're going to be. But Saul is then complaining about the fact that even his own son and everybody else is more favorable to David than to himself. Well, if you're, mean and nasty and acting irritable all the time, maybe somebody's going to say, yeah, that's the way it is. But by the way, the TV is on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, Doeg says, well, I saw what happened. I saw David come, and Ahimelech gave him the sword and gave him food. And so they bring Ahimelech in front, and he is killed. Obviously, the guy was innocent. He says, it's your son-in-law. He's the one who goes out in battle for you. And he even says, I've consulted God on behalf of him in other times. They had this pouch with the Urim and the Tumim, which some sort of things like dice or something where you would throw it on the ground, and if it came up one way, it would be a yes. If it came up another way, it would be no. And so nobody quite knows exactly how all of that worked, but Ahimelech says, this is nothing new or nothing different. I believe I could trust him. And so Doeg himself says, I'll go kill those guys, and does. And the only one who escapes is Abiathar. And Abiathar is going to show up all the way into 1 Kings chapter 2. All right, great-grandson of Eli. Eli's family had been told, you will not continue in the high priesthood because your sons were acting against me. And many of the commentators say this is simply part of that consequence of the wickedness coming upon them, even though this fourth and fifth generation maybe hadn't done anything wrong. Chapter 23 then, David goes to a particular city down in the southwest down here, probably pretty close to the Philistine territory. I think they put Keilah somewhere around here, or somewhere down quite toward the southern part of the country. So David hears that the Philistines are giving these people trouble. So he goes and he says, I'll help you guys out. And he wins a great victory over the Philistines. And the people of Keilah say, thank you very much. And if Saul wonders where you are, we're going to tell him.
Yeah.
That's a thanks, huh?
That's the thanks. And it is a walled city with gates. And so David says to Abiathar, would you please check with the Lord, should we run from here? And Abiathar checks with the Lord, and whatever message comes back with the Urim and Tumim says, yeah, the Lord says we better get out of here, Saul's coming after us. So God doesn't necessarily make all the plans and do everything just perfectly, but he will let them know what's going on. Okay, so some of our talk about, well, what does God plan? If he planned that David would win a victory, wouldn't you think he would plan that David would not get taken by Saul? All he does is he says, well, I know Saul's going to come after you. Well, if they're running in the hills, then Saul says, well, I'm not going to look for him anymore. Then people of the south in general, the wilderness of Ziph gets talked about a lot, and that's more to the east side over here. But the Ziphites, they regularly try to get David in trouble. They regularly call Saul up and say, we kind of know where he is, or we know exactly where he is. You want to come and you want to get him. So David is having to run from Saul all over the place, right? The trouble comes when they have a very exact description of it, and that's what we're going to get to next. But David is going back and forth here, and there's one place in Maon where Saul and David are on two sides of a hill. And so Saul is sending his soldiers around from the two sides to trap David. And then somebody comes and says, the Philistines are attacking us, and he has to break it off. There's very little theology in this whole section, but there is this kind of silent drumbeat. Whenever David is in trouble, the Lord is making a way that he's not going to get taken. So
Does-
here David could be taken by Saul. The Lord says, well, there's an attack by the Philistines. And so Saul says, well, I better go attack the Philistines and I'll try and take care of David later.
Is Saul still thinking that the Lord is on his side?
No, he knows that he isn't.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean he doesn't think he can still try to direct the matters in the future. Connie?
Isn't that similar to many of our politicians or leaders? They make a lot of decisions and they tend to, the power kind of corrupts.
I will acknowledge that sentence and just go on. Yeah. It is human nature. It is human nature that people act in their own self-interest, according to their own picture of the world that they want to have. And so Saul gets the idea things aren't really going his way, but that doesn't mean he stops. Dale?
David was anointed to be king, but he wasn't yet. He had to wait for Saul and Saul's entire family to be gone before that would happen.
Most of
And he
them,
was running in terror of Saul before he was ever king.
Mhm.
Is it an indication of a lack of faith or understanding on his part? That
No.
he knew he was never going to be king even though he was anointed?
No, just the opposite. He says, I know I'm going to be king, but I can't take it. I have to wait for it to come. What would happen if Prince Charles killed Queen Elizabeth? Does he become king?
I would guess that he would be killed too.
I think he would be in trouble.
But
So he has to wait for mommy to die.
Prince Charles here.
Huh?
We have the reverse happening. Saul's going to kill David, Queen Elizabeth is going to kill Prince Charles. Why should a prince not be afraid?
Saul wants to kill David because he thinks David wants to kill him. Even though David is desperate in saying, I'm not going to kill him for anything, which is what the next chapter is going to do for us, and chapter 26.
And isn't
So-
that part of the fact that God anointed Saul and?
He says, yeah, I'm not going to kill the Lord's anointed.
Right.
I'm not going to kill the Lord's anointed. So Saul has nothing to fear, and he is afraid. He has nothing to fear. But his own heart and his own machinations of how he thinks lead him to impose on David the same kind of thinking. So when you see someone acting wickedly, that's much more finding out what's in their heart than what's in the heart of the other person. But David will not lay a hand on Saul. In fact, we're going to see in a few minutes what trouble is he in chapter 29 when Achish says, okay, let's go up and attack Saul in the valley of Jezreel. And David says, okay, yeah, let's go. Down deep he's saying, how am I going to get out of this one? Because I can't go against Saul. And then the other four kings or commanders, depending on how we look at it, say to Achish, you better not trust that guy. That's the unseen drumbeat of God saying, I will work through certain human events to protect David. And in what we're going to see very soon, how Abigail keeps him from killing Nabal. And so in all sorts of cases, sometimes where David could fly off the handle, sometimes where he's just got to kind of play the game, whose side are you on anyway? And God pulls these little things. These little things happen because that's the way human beings are. They're afraid of David. We're not sure if he's on our side or the other side. And so in the deepest analysis, we might say, well, God put into the mind of those other Philistines just enough distrust that they said, you better send that guy back home. So David will not lay his hands on Saul, but Saul doesn't believe that. This evil that's in his heart, he sees David winning victories. He wants desperately to have David quit being his son-in-law. Because right now, except for Adriel, who we never hear about otherwise, David is going to become the king and be related to Saul. And he says, no, I don't want that to happen. In fact, he really castigates Jonathan. Why are you so dumb to let him go on? He's going to take your job. And Jonathan is pretty much saying, well, I believe that's the Lord's will, and I'm going to stand aside. I'm not going to stand in the way of that. And of course, poor Jonathan, he dies in battle that day too, with his brothers. Chapter 24 is the first of the two times when David has a chance to kill Saul and doesn't. En Gedi is a beautiful place. Ayin, or En in Hebrew, is the word for it can be for a well, but at En Gedi, it's actually a place where there's a gusher of water up high in the cliff that has a nice little waterfall and a beautiful pool down below. And it's Ein Gedi is the well of the goats. And so you'll have all sorts of livestock, both the wild and domestic livestock that will be around there. And will be getting their water from there. And so it's not too hard to figure out that David is going to be hiding somewhere nearby. And so David hears that he's gone from the wilderness of Ziph over here to a little bit farther north. Now, it's probably going to be somewhere right along in here by the Dead Sea, and it's just in a little bit from there. Unfortunately, Kathy had heat stroke that she got at Masada that morning early, so we didn't go into the water. I didn't go into the water, but beautiful, nice waterfall and everything coming down. And Saul goes off by himself to do his business into the very cave where David and his men are hiding farther back in the cave. And he squats down and does his business, and all the other guys say, "Kill him now! Kill him now!" And he says, "No, I won't lay my hands on the Lord's anointed." I mean, this is where we find out what's in his heart. You know, with every human being, there are certain things where you find out what's in their heart. They may smile, they may laugh, or they may even be grumpy. But when push comes to shove, as we say, you find out what's really going on inside someone's heart. And so here's where David says, you want to read my heart? Here's part of your robe. And what I keep wondering is, did he have some scissors? I don't know how you cut off part of a robe, even with a sword, without making some noise. And how much of it, and all of that, you know. But Saul goes out, and David and his others go after him, and he yells to him, and he says, "By the way, is this yours, Saul? I could have used the sword to kill you, and I didn't. Why are you chasing after me?" And you know, you can calm people down for a while. If their heart really doesn't want to be calmed down, they come back to their real heart sooner or later. All right, and so the reality is Saul is never going to be convinced. Never going to be convinced. But anyway, he says, "David, you are more righteous than I am." And so may God reward you. You're going to reign someday. So it sounds all nice and pious and holy and everything. But then he's right back to chasing after him again. So it didn't kind of last. And all he gets David to promise is, "I won't wipe out your entire family." And that's where the comment that Connie made about Mephibosheth is going to come in, where one of Jonathan's sons gets brought into David's household. And it says then David went back to the stronghold, so some sort of a fortification that he had where he could be protected. So for a little while, David is okay with that. And then we get a kind of an interim story between these two times when he could have killed. The first one is when he could have stabbed him when he was by himself in the cave. The next time is going to be where they're all with a deep sleep. But in the middle of this comes another time where David could have gotten himself in terrible trouble. He could have brought blood guilt on himself by killing Nabal. Now, Dale will remember this story. When we used to go to Tiger ball games in Detroit, we'd go and park in one of the little lots that was around Tiger Stadium. And sure shooting, there'd be some kid about 10 years old who would come up and say, for $5, I'll watch your hubcaps. Remember that, Dale? Don't you? Oh, yeah. For $5, I'll watch your hubcaps. At which point you say, dummy, why didn't you take them off and put them in the trunk? Well, those kids, they didn't have anything to do with that parking lot.
No?
But they said, give me $5, I'll watch your hubcaps. I could have given them $5, they still wouldn't have watched them. They just said, dummy. So here's David. He says, I've been watching your sheep, Nabal. I've been protecting your shepherds. And Nabal says to himself, I don't remember hiring him. Kathy and I were in Jerusalem back in 1972. And at the Damascus Gate, you could, I don't think you could do it anymore, you could go up a set of steps and walk all along the northeast part of the wall of Old Jerusalem, and then walk all the way down until you get just north of the Temple Mount. And some kid, as I'm walking up the steps, he says, can I walk along with you? I said, sure. We got down at the end and went into a little place to get a Coca-Cola, and the kid says, okay, pay me now. What do you mean, pay you now? Well, I gave you a tour. You owe me money. It's the same way David is doing this. We bought him a Coke, that's all we did. I didn't have any money. That's why I was walking instead of some other form. I can remember when Kathy and I were in Paris one year. I think it was the Christmas before, and we're walking up to the Louvre. And here's somebody taking our picture. I thought, oh my goodness, they're tourists thinking they're going to take pictures of us. We're tourists too. And then run after you and say, here, we'd like to sell you your picture. No, you're not going to sell me my picture.
We had a situation on our honeymoon. We were in Titograd. It was still Yugoslavia at the time. And we came in, you know, in the evening. We went to the hotel. And there was a guy outside that said, I'll watch your car tonight. And I don't remember what, you know, it was a ridiculous small amount he wanted. So we said fine. Because, you know, we were a little nervous, Yugoslavia. Came down the next morning, by gosh, he was there. He didn't want any more money.
He had the car right outside the door, and he sat there all night watching it
Yeah.
for
Oh,
like
my.
$3.
Oh my. Wow.
So that one had a good.
That one had a good ending to it, yes. Congratulations. Rare.
Yeah.
So I think what's happening is Nabal says there's a whole lot of guys running around in the hills. And this guy comes and says, oh, I've been watching over it. I don't care if the shepherds say he was doing it. I didn't hire him. I'm not going to pay him anything. And so here comes David now to kill him. And the sheep are probably about a mile north, according to what most of them think. And so he's coming down. Abigail, in the meantime, hears about this, and she grabs a whole bunch of food. And she goes with some of her people to go and meet him to say, my husband's a real dummy. Naval means stupid fool. So whether that was his actual name or just a nickname that they give him. So she comes and she says, please don't kill him. Again, God uses the natural inclination of a person to keep something from happening that could have brought trouble on David. So David will not kill when his buddies tempt him, go kill Saul. He doesn't stop to the temptation. He's acting on the temptation to go kill Nabal, and Abigail comes along. Well, when it says in the text, and I haven't seen this in commentaries, but it says that his heart turned to stone within him, and 10 days later he died.
Mine says he had a stroke.
Does it say that? That's what I think.
She came back and told him a day or two later what she had done.
She told him the next morning.
Yeah,
So yours does have that.
yeah.
Because the commentators that I've read recently haven't said that, but that's what I believe happened, that his heart turned, you know, he had a paralyzing stroke, and 10 days later he died. So you might laugh at him for that, but that's what I think happened. But some others say he just got really hard in his heart, and 10 days later God whacked him one. But you can't know. But the fact of that his heart turned to stone and died 10 days later seems to me like what we would describe as having a stroke, where he was paralyzed and 10 days later he died. And then what happens to Abigail?
She marries.
David takes her as a wife.
And one more.
And one more, Ahinoam. Yeah. Now, it's real strange because Saul's wife is also named Ahinoam. And so there's all sorts of confusion. Did David take Saul's wife? No. But it's kind of strange because what would you do if you killed your enemy? You would take his family.
Yeah.
So here the same name is at least running around with it.
So he now has 3 wives?
Huh? Yes, he has 3 wives now, though his wife, Michal, has been taken and given to Palti, or Paltiel, and he will ask for her back before the game is out. So he says, I want my wife back. Chapter 26, the Ziphites, who one should never trust a Ziphite, because they're always working on the other side. So they say, oh, David's at Hakilah, and David then sneaks into the camp at night. So this one is even more brash. Now I know the word tardema, 2 different stories in the Bible, maybe more than that. One of them is in Genesis 2, when a tardema falls on Adam, and God takes out the rib and makes Eve of it. The other is in chapter 15, where a tardema falls on Abraham, and he sees in this very deep sleep of his the fiery pot that goes through between the pieces of meat, symbolizing that God is asserting that his covenant promise will be kept true. So here God puts a sleep on them deep enough so that nobody stirs. And then David says to Abner and all the other boys in the band, you know, you all ought to be put to death for not protecting your king. But again, his cousin says, or his nephew I should say, says, you ought to kill that guy right now, or I'll do it for you, Abishai says. I'll just grab his spear and ram it through his head. Kind of sounds like Yael and Sisera, where she killed him. And he says, I won't have to do it twice. I'll ram it through good enough the first time. David says, we're not laying our hands on the Lord's anointed. And then takes the pot and the spear, and then in the morning, then he holds those 2 up. Now, I don't know if you know this, but what did they return and what didn't they return? He returned Saul's spear. He did not return the water jug. Now you know where the little brown jug came from.
Oh, boy.
I just want you to know. I just want you to know.
He speaks with forked tongue.
Only a guy from Michigan would say that.
Huh?
Only a guy from Michigan would
Go
say that.
blue. So, chapter 27. Now David is sure he's going to die by Saul's hand, because David keeps chasing after him. He's tried to hit him with his spear. He has a couple times tried to use a pincer movement. David has twice said, I'm not after you, and he says, okay, and then comes right back at it. And so David goes back to Achish, the king of Gath, down in the southwestern part of the country down here. First he goes to him, and by now Saul says, well, I'm not going to chase him anymore. So David says to Achish, how about giving me a city? So he gets the city of Ziklag. Nobody's quite sure where Ziklag is. But he gets this city of Ziklag, apparently a protected city, and he's lying again. He lies to his enemies really bad, a lot of times. And so he says, let me live there and I won't be underfoot all the time. And what he's really doing is all of the wicked people who have been attacking Judah, his own tribe, he's going and attacking and killing them. And there's Amalekites that he's killing and others. And so, let's see, I've got on my sheet here the Geshurites and the Girzites. Some say that's the Girgashites instead, and Amalek. He says, oh, I was raiding the Kenites and I was raiding Judah. So he's trying to let Achish know, I'm going against all those people of Judah. Achish didn't take good notes in school either, because he would have found out that David was a Judahite, and he would have never been killing his own family. So what David's doing, he is attacking the people who are raiding, and he's given the loot back to the guys they got it from. So he's making friends with his extended family in Judah. That's why when he becomes king, they're going to anoint him at Hebron up over about here somewhere. They'll anoint him at Hebron, where Abraham and his family was all buried, because he's made wonderful moves for them. He's already given them the stuff back and delivered them from their enemies, but it says David wiped out every last one of the people he was attacking, so none of them would be able to go and tell Achish that David, he's the one who did the killing. So Achish thinks the other side is in trouble. Then chapter 28, David becomes Achish's bodyguard. And this is when Achish and the other Philistines say, we're going up to the valley of Jezreel, which means the place where God sows grain. It's 10 miles north to south, 18 miles east to west is the usual numbers. Megiddo is at the far western edge. Beth Shean is to the east. To the north is where Jesus would have lived. The beginning of the hill country of the Galilee is right north of that. And so this is a major trade route that you would go through. That's why the Megiddo Pass, Har Megiddo, Armageddon as we know it, the Megiddo Pass was the point that you would go through and then go through the valley of Jezreel and then head your way on up toward Damascus. So they wanted it because it was farmland. I have a picture from Megiddo that I took looking east where they were burning off last year's crop in April and ready to go plant another crop once again. So, I mean, everybody, they're going to look for the prime real estate, and if you can take it, you take it. So, Saul says, well, God, what am I going to do? He's still trying to get some answers from God, and he doesn't get any good answers from God. So the Philistines and Saul are on the two sides of the valley, and usually you're going to fight down the valley below. So Saul goes to the witch of Endor, and he wants to find out what's going on. When God won't talk to him, he says to her, summon up Samuel, and his whole story about the fact that she realizes who Saul is then. And Samuel says, what are you disturbing me for? Sort of like his apparition or his ghost, or he himself comes up to talk to him, and I'm not going to be able to put all that together for you. Okay, there's all sorts of theories about that. All human beings go to the realm of the shades, and Samuel says, didn't I tell you that when you turned away from God, you wouldn't destroy the Amalekites, that the king was going to be taken away from you? And so Saul, who before, when they were battling, said nobody eats until the battle is over. Now he's not eating again, and he seems to have this opposite idea. You starve yourself, and then maybe God will feel sorry for you and help you win a victory. Finally, they get him to eat, even though he's going to die the next day. At this time, David has come up with the Philistines, and we would say, well, now they don't trust him, and so the other Philistines sent him back, and that's where I have in parentheses there, God spares David versus Saul. Okay? So you have to really know that God's promised David to become king, and yet that David can't go kill Saul, to understand all of these dangerous situations that David is in as he's on the run. He can't lay his hands on Saul. This one is where he gets closest to it. And then the others get sent back. Yes, ma'am?
But why was David anointed before Saul died to make,
Because God says, I've had enough of him, I'm going to get the next one going right now.
and it's just to get the other one up and running, even though he was running all over the place and getting in line and doing all these crazy things? He was just getting him up and running, huh? Why?
That's a very good.
I just wonder why.
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
It's the way he did it.
Yep. Saul
So
could have
that
died.
when Saul dies, David is only going to be king over Judah for the next 7 years.
Yeah.
And Ishbosheth will be the king over the northern kingdom. Abner will be the real power behind the throne. But, my confirmands sometimes ask me this, why did it happen this way? One of my confirmands, I was talking about something with the fact that a child in the time of, like Jesus, your job was to try and learn the skill of your father to be just like your father. So if your father was a good carpenter, you become a good carpenter. And my one student said, or to be better, right? And I said, no, they were not to become better or different. They were supposed to learn the skills and replicate what their father did, not to try and do something else. Why? And why not? Why wouldn't they become better? I said that wasn't the goal or the aim at that time, and I don't know the answer to these. I mean, we all have inquiring minds about why was it done that way. It would be easier if when Saul died, then God went and anointed David,
Right.
and we'd be on. But I think part of it is at least to show us how hateful Saul was after God left him. And so that he recognizes that God is apart from him, and so we're going to see some of that too. Instead of just saying, well, he was probably a neutral. No, he's an enemy of God as well, and very grumpy with God for not telling him more. So, chapter 29, they come back to find out that Ziklag has been robbed. They didn't leave anybody back there. They took all the soldiers, and the Amalekites went and showed up again. And see, if Agag and all of those had been wiped out by Saul, they wouldn't be around anymore. The fact that Saul didn't wipe everybody out means they're still there. We're going to find a very interesting thing, I mentioned this before, that Haman the Agagite is going to show up in the Esther story. Haman, the descendant of Agag. In the Esther story in Persia, there's still going to be some Amalekites kicking around, making trouble, and trying to destroy them. And then God wipes that guy out finally. Anyway, everybody was taken. A little Egyptian boy who had been sick is found. They give him food. He tells them where the camp is if they don't turn him in, and that's a no-brainer. And so they go back and they get everything, and they destroy all but 400 of the Amalekites. So they're still out running around. The 200 who were too weary to be able to go, though they also serve who only stand and wait. Those who are on guard as well. And so David says they worked until they didn't have anything more in them. And so they're going to get the spoils back, and they're going to divide the bigger spoils as well. We're not going to just give their own family back. They came and they tried until they didn't have any more get up and go. And so they're all going to get the spoils of war. And finally, the last chapter, that at Mount Gilboa, up in the north in that Jezreel Valley, Saul and his 3 sons are killed. We're going to find a different answer in 2 Samuel 1 about how Saul's death took place. From an Amalekite kid who didn't study very well in school either, to know that David was not trying to kill Saul. And so Amalekites, they show up all over the place, poor guys. So Saul says to his armor bearer, kill me. I don't want them to be sporting with me. And when the kid won't do it, then he falls on his own sword and dies. And then the armor bearer kills himself as well. Oddly enough, the Bible, there are very rare times when we have any suicides. And the Bible rarely, if ever, does any speculating about that. Okay, so we might think that it should say something. This tells the stories. It's not about the morality of these things. Okay, and that might be frustrating. We've read this story through, and about the only thing I can tell you is it says God made Saul, or made David the new king, and even though David sometimes almost got himself in trouble and sometimes spared Saul, finally he did not act against the king, and that God was with him. The armor is taken one place, his head is taken one place. When we hear about the beheadings today and all the things that have gone on, that's nothing new. That's typical of what's gone on throughout history. And the mocking and the shaming of the enemies and those who are at us. And so the people of Jabesh Gilead come and they get the body. Remember, he was the one in chapter 11 who, when Nahash said he was going to destroy or blind the right eye of all the Jabesh Gileadites, that Saul came and helped them. And I always thought that the problem was with depth perception. But in one of the commentaries I read recently, it said the other thing might be that if you hold a shield up, that covers your left eye, so only your right eye would be outside the shield. So if you kill the right eye, if you stab that, then that also will just make it very hard to be able to protect yourself. So I asked my doctor father, Hans-Walter Wolf, this once. I said, something about, don't you ever get tired of reading books? He said, there's something new in every one of them. There's always some new insight that somebody has, and he read many more than I ever will. But I continue to find that kind of a joy as well. There's always some little thing that maybe explains a little better of what they're doing, why they're doing it. I was asked about this thing with Saul and the evil spirit. And I think the real question is, does God ever send evil spirits to us? Or could God ever send to us an evil spirit? Saul's spirit or evil spirit, notice it doesn't say angel.
It doesn't say what?
It doesn't say angel.
Oh,
We tend to look in the dictionary, Bible dictionary, we tend to take all of everything and put it all together, when there are a variety of different kinds of ideas that are going on. In the main, when you died, you were buried. And you were buried in a safe place where the animals and birds and everything could not get to you. And the thought was that your spirit would go percolate down through the dust, down to the realm of the shades. You see this in Isaiah 14 as well, with the king of Babylon. If you were a bad person, then you wouldn't get buried. The birds and the animals would pick you to death out there on a field somewhere where you had been killed, and then they would talk about that as an evil spirit, or a person's evil remnant, whatever. And so sometimes they would talk about the fact that an evil person might occupy the body of a good person. We said when Jesus casts out demons, that maybe that's going on, and that they want to get that good person buried, and then they can percolate down to the realm of the dead. In other words, if you are looking for the entry to the realm of the shades, and because you're evil and your body isn't decaying, you can't find that, then you could hopefully hitchhike on someone else. So the kid who is thrown into the water and into the fire, or the animal, the pigs that get it at the time of the New Testament, that may be some of it. It may be more in that rather than evil demons or something like that. I honestly think that it just simply says he was out of sorts all the time. And the depth of who he was against everything that God had made. And that's the word that gets used. And we're not going to know more than that. That we're just plain not going to get to know more. When Saul is summed up, the necromancer, the one who can bring up people from the dead, she is going to simply try to communicate with them, and that's an evil person too. Saul, every once in a while, actually says, don't eat that meat, you haven't cooked it yet, let's offer it on a stone. And a couple other times here, he's said there can be no witches who are going to be operating, even though he still goes that way himself. I don't think we as Christians have to worry about that, because the Spirit of God settles us and gives us peace. God never sends an evil spirit to a righteous person to try to get them to do something different. God's not going to tempt us with evil. I don't think I have to fear that. I don't have to worry about going to sleep at night and I'm going to have an evil demon in me by the morning. Perfect love casts out fear, and God is love. And so he says, don't you worry about that. But we all have had experiences where somebody seems so set against the Christian faith, we wonder, what in the world is really going on there? I've had that a few times in my life where there has been just more of a rage out of somebody than ought to be natural or normal. And I don't know what to make of that. I frankly don't think it matters. I'm not going to go try and monkey around to try to get close to such things. And what God hasn't revealed to us, I don't think it's our job to try and rummage around and try and figure it out. But I know that this comes to Saul after he is rejected, being under the Lord. And we who are Christians need not worry about that. And Christ has taken away the power of death, and he has poured his Spirit into us, and that's what holds on to us. So we are certainly interested in what this is and what happens. I just think it's too easy to try to take a text and try to explain for today something that maybe was from a conceptual framework we don't quite work with, but we need not. And so, best I can do with that one.